situation as it stands at present in IIOJK. After the discussion and towards the close of the event, the floor will be open for the question and answer session. Among our distinguished speakers, we have Ambassador Sardar Masood Khan, former President Azad Jammu and Kashmir, as the keynote speaker of the event. Ambassador Masood Khan has served as the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has also served as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations and international organizations in Geneva, Switzerland. Ambassador Masood also served as Pakistan's ambassador to China and permanent representative to the United Nations, New York. Prior to becoming President Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Ambassador Masood Khan served as Director General of Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. The first speaker of today's event is Dr. Sarina Hussain. Dr. Sarina Hussain is a sociologist and human geographer. She currently works as Associate Professor at the Center for Trust, Peace, and Social Relations at Coventry University. Her previous roles include Principal Scientist on Multiculturalism and International Migration, at Charles Darwin University in Australia, and Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the School of Geography at the University of Oxford, where she remained a visiting Senior Research Associate till 2013. Our second speaker for the event is Ms. Mishal Hussain Malik. Ms. Malik is a chairman of Peace and Culture organization who's struggling for the rights of people of Kashmir. She is a human rights activist, defender of rights of Kashmiris, and wife of Kashmiri leader Yasin Malik. Before I call upon Ambassador Sardar Masood Khan for his keynote speech, I invite Brigadier Rashid Ali Janjua for his welcome address.
Ambassador Masood, Ambassador Inam, Chairman BOG, distinguished visitors, I, on behalf of Islamabad Policy Research Institute, extend a very warm welcome to you all. We have gathered here today to have a discourse on something that is close to all of our hearts. Today is 26th October, which marks the actual day on which the first Indian troops landed on Srinagar airport. We are all well aware of the historical facts about Kashmir, but days like 26th October every year bring into sharp relief the brutal Indian military occupation based on a dubious instrument of accession that set into motion a chain of unjust actions that continue unabated. The Maharaja of Kashmir, who had entered into a standstill agreement with Pakistan, deterred and procrastinated with a malified intent to keep himself in power for as long as possible. Faced with a popular revolt and fearful of the wrath of people, he fled the capital and was still in transit when the Indians lifted one Sikh regiment and took it to Srinagar airport, lighting a prairie fire of conflict and bloodshed that was temporarily halted when Pandit Nehru took the issue to United Nations. As per famous historian Andrew Roberts, in his classic Eminent Churchillians, the Indian troops had moved into Kashmir before the tribesmen even crossed the border. The instrument of accession, as per Stanley Wolpert, was signed by the Maharaja after occupation of the Srinagar airlift by one Sikh regiment. Alistair Lamb also writes in Kashmir, a disputed legacy, that since Maharaja was on the run towards journey of 350 kilometers, there's no way he could have signed an instrument of accession on 26th of October, as claimed by the Indians. The UN resolutions that called for plebiscite were not honored by India on one pretext or the other. And from 1948 onwards, the Kashmiri dispute witnessed a continual spectacle of Indians reneging from all commitments and encroaching sedulously upon the freedoms granted to Kashmiris as per the UN Charter. The apotheosis of this sordid drama of occupation was the revocation of Article 370 and 35A and its denouement in the shape of illegal annexation of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. 3.8 million non-domiciled people have been settled in the state after 2019. And out of these, 1.2 million have been added to the voter list, along with gerrymandering of electoral constituencies. Kashmir remains in bondage after 2 years of illegal annexation by India. In last 2 years, the Indians have continually encroached upon the state's political and sociological identity through illegal extension of Indian laws to the illegally occupied state. The Indian annexation of Kashmir is violative of UN resolutions 47, 38, 39, 80, and so on and so forth. Legally, constitutionally, and morally, the state of Jammu and Kashmir remains under illegal occupation. And the Indian attempts of demographic changes to convert the Kashmiris into a minority constitute egregious violation of international law by an occupation army. The heartless Indian occupation so far has resulted in injuries to 10,500 Kashmiris between 2016 and October 2020. And mind you, these injuries were affected by inhuman pellet guns which are used for animals and not human beings. According to Legal Forum for Oppressed Voices of Kashmir, 474 people have been killed due to violence in 2020 alone. The Genocide Watch, which is a watchdog Geneva-based of genocide, has identified 10 stages: classification, symbolization, disinformation, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. Each one of the above stages could follow a linear progression or happen simultaneously. In Kashmir's case, the Genocide Watch has identified the stage entering the 8th stage, that is extermination stage, which is staring Kashmiris in the face. Since August 2019, when the illegal annexation happened, the state has suffered a loss of over $5.3 billion to economy. That was a result of the curfews, internet blockade for over 7 months, and complete brutal crackdown against local population. The Kashmiris are being punished for their tenacity and uncompromising fidelity to the cause of freedom that was denied to them because of Indian denial of UN resolutions. As Kashmir suffers the implacable march of Indian illegal occupation that began through a dubious instrument of accession on 26th of October in 1947, the taxonomy of violence features all kinds of crimes, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. It is now up to International Criminal Court to censor the Indian depredations, or for the United Nations to take cognizance under Chapter 7. All this would be a test of the will and strength of the collective human conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, with these few words, I have set the stage, and I'll not remain any more between you and one of the most learned exponents of Kashmir cause, Sardar Masood. So, sir, I invite you to come on the podium and share your thoughts.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficent, President of IPRI, Ambassador Inam al-Haq, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Ambassador Asad Durrani, distinguished participants, it's a pleasure to talk to you. First, I apologize to you for showing up late because I had a prior engagement and I had forewarned the organizers that that might cause some disruption, and it has. My apologies to you. The 26th of October is called the Black Day, and there's a rationale behind it. Let me tell you that this struggle for the freedom on self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir has been going on for 2 centuries. It started in 1819, as a matter of fact, and it continues even up to this day. The earlier part of the independence struggle has been forgotten. It is buried in the books of history. But the people of Jammu and Kashmir have given innumerable sacrifices for the freedom of their land. From the Dogra dynasty first, and for the past 74 years, from the tyrannical rule of the successive Indian governments. Why do we call it a Black Day? Let me once again take you back to 1931. This was a day when, and to be very precise, it was July the 13th, 1931, a gentleman by the name of Abdul Qadir Khan was being tried in Srinagar jail. He was being tried in Srinagar jail because the judge and the administration was apprehensive that if the trial took place in a court, there could be huge disruption. And that's why they held this trial in the confines of the jail itself. And there, something seminal happened. Several weeks ago, Abdul Qadir Khan, at a place called Khankai Mohalla, where Kashmiri youth had gathered, and they were talking about the tyranny of the Maharaja of Kashmir against the backdrop of desecration of Quran, closure of mosques, discrimination against Muslims, and also general ruthlessness of the Dogra dynasty towards the Muslim population. They're saying, what should we do? And this Abdul Qadir Khan stood up and he said, pointing towards the palace of the Maharaja of Kashmir, he said, raise this edifice of tyranny to the ground. This was considered a seditious statement. He was imprisoned and he was tried for treason. While he was being tried on July the 13th, the time for prayers came, and a person stood up to say azan, to recite azan. As he stood up, the police shot him dead. 22 people stood up to complete azan. And they're called martyrs of Kashmir. And we mark this day, we call it Martyrs Day, Kashmir Martyrs Day. The reason I highlight this, that's when this struggle for the freedom of Kashmir started. And at a time, a party was created, which was called the National Conference. It was led by Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah and Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas. Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah was the president. Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas was the Secretary General. In fact, in the early 30s, the Indian government, the top Indian leadership in the Congress at that time, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, all of them started planning for occupation of the Jammu and Kashmir state. And after a while, their conspiracy succeeded, and they separated the pro-Muslim Muslim League element within the National Conference. And initially, the party that was formed there was called the Muslim Conference, but later on, another entity was created, which was called National Conference, and that was associated with the Indian National Congress. While the National Conference comprised nationalists who wanted an independent Kashmir, their real intention was to align Jammu and Kashmir with India, whereas the majority of the Muslims and the majority of the Kashmiris wanted to join Pakistan. So that is the basic dialectic that led to the events in 1974. This is 1947. Fast forward 1947, the Independence Act of 1947 is unveiled in June. It's at that time that the top leadership of the Congress accelerates the process for the accession and occupation of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And they make frequent visits to the territory. The Maharani conspires with Meher Chand Mahajan, who later on became a member of the Red Cloth Award, to sever links with Pakistan, associate the state of Jammu and Kashmir with India. All of them played a nefarious role. Sardar Patel himself, Lord Mountbatten, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and to an extent, Mahatma Gandhi, his sympathetic statements notwithstanding. Now, I narrate these incidents because on the 19th of July, 1947, before the creation of Pakistan, the people of Jammu and Kashmir, representing all segments of society, not just Muslims, but also Dogras and Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists, at the residence of Sardar Muhammad Ibrahim Khan, under the banner of Muslim Conference, they decided unanimously that they wanted to accede to Pakistan. And this was supported by the formula given by the 1947 Independence Act. And this was the wish and aspiration of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. But during the months of June and August, India had clandestinely imported armed forces in plain clothes from East Punjab and Patiala and Kapurthala and stationed them in different parts of Jammu and Kashmir. A parallel movement was also taking place. The people of Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, they were also preparing. Also people in Jammu and Kashmir, they wanted to fight. They wanted to liberate their territory. They knew the intentions of the Congress party. They knew the intentions of Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah and the Maharaja of Kashmir. And therefore, in the months of August and September through October, they elaborated their command and control structure. These were all, most of them, 60,000, I think, at that time, according to one estimate. They were veterans of the Second World War. And they formed this armed forces, which was later on called Azad Kashmir Regimental Force. They fought and went up to Baramulla and liberated this territory, 13,300 square kilometers of Azad Jammu and Kashmir territory, and some 72,000 square kilometers of Gilgit-Baltistan. this myth about the tribesmen interfering or intervening, and therefore creating a justification for mobilization of Indian troops and landing of Indian troops at Srinagar on October the 27th, was therefore a false justification, because Kashmir had already been militarized. Intervention had already taken place, and that had been done surreptitiously, while our freedom fighters did it openly, and they liberated this territory. There was a standstill agreement between Maharaja and Pakistan. India refused to decline to, under one pretext or the other, to have a standstill agreement with the Maharaja. So all this culminates in the month of October, when the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir is crushed. India, which had already mobilized its troops to the border between Himachal Pradesh and Jammu, it had also secured the airport. It had established a communication network before they staged the drama of signing an instrument of accession with the Maharaja of Kashmir. I tell you this tale because most of the Pakistanis, even historians, diplomats, analysts, they've forgotten about this story. They've forgotten this story that there was this war of independence that the people of Jammu and Kashmir had fought, and had India not landed its troops, they would have liberated the entire territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The other factor that I want to tell you is that very few people know that in the month of November 1947, 250,000 Muslims were massacred by the Indian National Army, by RSS operatives, by the Dogra army, with the active connivance and support of the Indian government. And most of these genocidaires who committed these crimes against humanity, as I repeatedly said, the first genocide after the Second World War, they were accommodated in Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah's first cabinet. Genocidaires were rewarded. And therefore, this is called a Black Day. A Black Day when India, after getting independence from British imperialists, months later became a colonizer itself and occupied that territory, and Kashmir became a chunk of Kashmir became a colonial territory. I can go on and on, but I would not. Fast forward, the president of IPRI, I want to compliment you for the synoptic analysis that you presented, and you captured it all, as a matter of fact, because you covered various stages of history, and you've also brought us to the contemporary challenges that we face. What I want to say here is that today, the Black Day continues. The Black Day continues as we've come here, we've taken showers with hot water and no shortage of food, as a matter of fact, for most of the audience. And we are all neatly dressed and so on. The people of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in the Kashmir, after 2019, are suffering. They are being killed and maimed and tortured and incarcerated illegally. And there are about 14,000 young boys who rot in jails while they are being indoctrinated. There are concentration camps set up in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and also in the most notorious prison houses in India. This is what is happening today. That's not all. India has, in fact, compiled a compendium of different fascist practices in different parts of the world and different phases of history. They borrowed forced migration or transfer of population, illegal transfer of population from Hitler's Germany, land grab from South Africa, and many practices, they borrowed many practices from Israel. And that's what is being played out there. You cited a figure, according to one figure that I have, and it was probably released by one of their ministers, it was the Deputy Home Minister. 4.2 million people have already been given domicile in Kashmir. And land grab, 80% of Kashmiri land has been grabbed. It has been declared India's land. Their territory has been called the Union Territory. Young boys are being killed in cordon search operations. India has created a fake militant group comprising 150 to 250 so-called militants. They do the bidding of the police of the occupied territory or the occupation forces to create justification to kill people who dare raise the slogan of Azadi, who dare demonstrate their inclination towards Pakistan. Let me come to the practical part. Some of it is being chronicled, some of it is being conveyed to the chronicled by the United Nations through our foreign ministry. Our foreign minister has been addressing communications to the President of the United Nations Security Council. He's been writing to the Secretary General. And they have issued dossiers which establish that what India is doing right now is crimes against humanity, it is genocide, it's ethnic cleansing, it is war crimes. And they have cited the instruments of international law and international humanitarian law that hold India cognizable. This is good, because this is one option that we have. When I used to be in New York, Palestinians were getting nowhere. They have an observer status at the United Nations, and their persona is recognized. But Israel had encircled them and is claiming that their territory is Israel's territory, and that the land that they occupied, either purchased or commandeered or occupied since 1918, is now legitimately Israel's. And Palestinians would not make any headway. But Palestinians every day would chronicle crimes against humanity being committed in the occupied Palestinian territory, because this was the only option that they had. This was the only avenue that was open to them. The point here is that our Foreign Office should continue to communicate with the United Nations And we must document and chronicle all the crimes that are being committed systematically, defying international law. We should address, we are probably addressing such communications to the IFRC, ICRC, to the International Law Commission, to the ICC. There's no bar in sending communications to ICC. And they do not have to go from the state entities and state organs. Or to the ICJ. There are two types of ICJs. One is, of course, International Court of Justice, but there is also International Commission of Jurists. So we have so many avenues available. I think that we are not sending a critical mass of communications to the European Union or to the European Parliament. Their doors are open. We are communicating with the Human Rights Council. That's a very good thing. But again, the volume is not proportionate to the crimes that are being committed. I'm identifying the options, the avenues that are open for us. Because sometimes some of the detractors and doubters, they say, what is it that we can do? They talk about our helplessness. No. Let me tell you that as far as the kinetic dimension is concerned, war right now is not an option. Mutual deterrence has reinforced the status quo. This doesn't kill or crush your intent to have and to exercise the military option. But right now, objective conditions as they prevail debar you from starting a war to defend the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Geostrategic landscape doesn't allow that. I'm speaking candidly to everybody. This is no diplomatese. But in the realm of communication, the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit so that we can play our part in reducing the darkness, the pall of darkness that is wrapped around the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and they have been cut off from the rest of the world. And through lockdowns and communication blockades and an asphyxiating siege, the world doesn't see the horrors that are unfold there every day. So the people of Azad Kashmir are free, the people of Pakistan are free, and we have friends all over the world. Pakistan have friends all over the world. Even if these are not the governments, then we have parliamentarians or political parties or civil society leaders or entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs. Are we reaching out to them? That's the question. And is leadership being demonstrated? Let me tell you here, there's a bit of confusion about diplomatic outreach. First, in Pakistan, there's this impression that when you talk about moral, diplomatic, and political support, they think that this is you making some sort of a weak commitment, that you're weakening your commitment. They do not know the power of moral, diplomatic, and political support. And there, I would say, the people also confuse what political support is and what diplomatic support is. Diplomats traditionally would go to capitals, their foreign offices, they would give their démarches, their talking points, they would try to convince their interlocutors. Diplomats working in multilateral fora, they go, they raise it in the committees or the General Assembly or United Nations Security Council leadership or the Secretary General or probably a High Commissioner for Human Rights, and they would lobby with these nations. but there are no politicians. Earlier today, I was talking to another audience and I said that political outreach is different from diplomatic endeavor. And political leaders representing different political parties in Pakistan, they should reach out to their counterparts, either in the Interparliamentary Union or counterpart organizations that exist. And that's very important. Because if our political pincer is weak, we would not be able to contribute to the reduction of darkness, the blackness in Jammu and Kashmir. People will continue to be massacred and butchered. So there is no fait accompli for us unless we choose to make it one. This is very important to understand. My last point is that Pakistan is a country of 220 million people. It's a strong nation. It was created by our founding fathers. But it was the will of God Almighty that this state was created. This state was not to be. Till 1947, early months of till 47. But then it was created. And the people of Pakistan and successive governments have sustained this state despite all the vicissitudes and turbulence. And it stands on its feet. It's a nuclear weapon state. When decisions are made in or Washington or Beijing, Pakistan is counted. Pakistan is present there on peace tables or multilateral tables all around the world. If you would count top 30 nations, Pakistan would be included, inevitably included. What I'm saying, your perception of a weak state is wrong. You must understand that you're a strong nation. You have survived many vicissitudes. And had there been another nation like you, it would have collapsed and disappeared and vaporized. So the state that you're giving to the younger generation is a sovereign state, is a state capable of defending itself. Understand this. It has economic problems, but it has full capability to negotiate a transition towards a rich, prosperous Pakistan. Have faith in this and you'll make it happen. Why do I mention this? I mention this because many in Pakistan think that Kashmir is a remote territory, that probably there is this conflict going on about right to self-determination, about human rights. They don't see the catastrophe there. They don't visualize the kind of suffering that people are passing through. They don't see that this tragedy is as agonizing as it were to happen in Karachi or Peshawar or Lahore or Quetta. Let me tell you that India has invented this myth that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. Had it been an integral part of India, it would have been integrated into India. Decades ago, it's an alien territory. It's an alien territory. And Jammu and Kashmir's affinity with Pakistan is so strong that the people of Jammu and Kashmir, for defending that vow of accession to Pakistan made on July the 19th, 1947, have given the ultimate sacrifice of 500,000 lives. And even today, they are fighting. Mishal Malik has come. She'll tell you her narrative, her story, her tragic story. Mr. Yasin Malik is in Tihar jail, suffering, confined to a small cubicle there, living in torturous conditions. Asya Indrabi in Tihar jail, Shabir Shah. All our leadership is in incarceration. So I would say, I'd appeal to all of you, as a matter of fact, that think that Jammu and Kashmir is part of your body politics, part of your state, as much as any part of Pakistan is. With these remarks, I reiterate this vow that we, the people of Jammu and Kashmir, will continue our struggle until we win our freedom and liberty and right to self-determination. And whether or not there were UN Security Council resolutions or there was an Independence Act, or whether or not it was written in any international law, any statute, the 20 million people of Jammu and Kashmir have a right to determine their destiny, and no power on earth can deprive them of this inalienable right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now request our first speaker, Dr. Sarina Hussain, to kindly commence with our presentation. Dr. Sarina, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I'd like to thank IPRI again for continuing to support these very, very important seminars that act as really crucial platforms for discussion on the current situation in Jammu and Kashmir, as well as, of course, allowing us to revisit some very important historical events. I'd also like to thank Ambassador Sardar Masood Khan for his very valuable and insightful comments. I'll keep it brief. I have a presentation that I would like to share. So just really to reiterate some of what has already been discussed this morning. The relationship with India and J&K was certainly up for dispute for quite some time. We know that the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir has been an internationally recognized disputed territory for more than 70 years. And again, just to really labor the point that has already been made this morning, the movement for autonomy was a civilian-led movement, and it was really a response to brutal taxation policies and other very, very cruel policies that were implemented on the people of Jammu and Kashmir by the Dogra Raj at the time. This led to a number of indigenous-led political parties, as already mentioned, the All Jammu Kashmir Muslim Conference, which then led to the National Conference, but there was also the Kisan Mazdoor Conference. And I think it's very important, as has already been stated this morning, that we don't forget that it was the people of J&K who were pushing for greater autonomy. And that has not changed. And really, in terms of the international community's role, they very much acknowledged that and supported that. Now, we've already heard about the instrument of accession. And again, of course, we know that some historians, such as Alistair Lamb, dispute whether the instrument of accession was actually ever signed by the Maharaja. But whether it was or it wasn't, what is very important is to acknowledge the fact that it set the groundwork for the relationship between the Indian Union and Jammu and Kashmir. This meant that it allowed J&K to have a certain level of autonomy. And that was very, very important in terms of the population's right to self-determination, not least because it protected who was able to become a permanent resident of the state, which would be very, very important if ever there were to be a plebiscite administered in J&K in terms of the people being allowed to determine their own sovereignty. So fast forwarding, what was or what started off as Indian control very much led to occupation and annexation in its most literal sense. So on August 5th, 2019, the government of India revoked the special status of J&K. This was a completely illegal move in terms of the Constitution of India itself. And it resulted in, as I said, an undeniable occupation of the territory. What happened alongside that was a huge increase in military personnel. And what I really want to mention today, and as I said, I will keep this brief, but I think it does warrant some attention, because this is really, as we speak, literally what is unfolding on the ground. The rationale behind the abrogation in terms of the BJP and the Indian government was that it would firstly facilitate greater integration of J&K into the Indian Union, and that this would be, you know, a very positive move for the population of J&K. It would provide greater development, but also it would allow them to feel as though they were more legitimately part of Indian society. And secondly, it was to have more control on the ground, which they argued would result in better security and safety for the people of J&K. Now, anyone who's been following the events of the last 3 weeks knows that this has been a complete farce, and the security situation in J&K right now is probably one of the worst that we've seen in decades. So we have seen in the last 3 weeks multiple killings of Kashmiri citizens, be they Hindu, Sikh or Muslim. And despite J&K being the most militarized zone on the planet, India has not managed to keep the people of J&K safe. So this whole narrative about providing better security and safety for the people of J&K, we can see is a complete whitewash. In fact, if anything, what we're now witnessing is less control. And again, this really needs to be acknowledged by the international community, that we have these operations going on, and the one in Poonch continues to go on, and we're looking at, I think it's day 16 today. But how much control does India actually have over the territory? And how much control will it insist on, you know, how far will it push its boundaries? So we already know that there have been appalling human rights abuses. Movement was mitigated. People couldn't get to hospitals. I discussed that at the previous seminar, but this continues. And in terms of this narrative about greater integration, we're seeing more violence against Kashmiris, not less, within the Indian Union. And as a result of Pakistan winning the T20, just something even as minor as a sports event has led to students in India being targeted and facing violent attacks. This doesn't in any way demonstrate that Kashmiris are being integrated or viewed more positively. In fact, it seems to be that it's having the converse effect. And finally, I mean, in yet another bizarre turn of events, the Jammu Kashmir police have actually filed FRIs on students within Kashmir because they had apparently been seen to support the Pakistani cricket team. Imagine being a student in Kashmir and not even being able to be free to support a sports team without fear of arrest. What this demonstrates is a real desperation on the part of the Indian state to maintain some kind of control of a state that it clearly cannot control. It has tried every extreme measure that it has possible, and it's still failing to control and to quash the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And really, I think today, as we think back historically to the fact that this movement was a civilian indigenous movement, we're reminded that it doesn't matter whether it's the most militarized zone on the planet. It doesn't matter that we're 74 years on. It doesn't matter even that these clauses have been abrogated. The people of J&K remain as determined to fight for their sovereignty and their right to self-determination. And I think I'm going to leave it there.
Dr. Serena, thank you very much. I will now request our second speaker, Ms. Mishal Hussain Malik, to kindly come on the podium to give our presentation. Thank you very much.
First of all, I'm very grateful to IPRI Institute for inviting me, to Brigadier Sahab and to his entire team over here, and to the Honorable Masood Khan Sahab, former President of Azad Kashmir and a very vocal voice for the Kashmir issue, and to all the respectable audience and to the media. I would like to share some of my viewpoints in Urdu because of the media. आज का दिन का जो हमारा ये सेमिनार चल रहा है, इसके अंदर 27 अक्टूबर के हवाले से जो हम समझते हैं, कश्मीरी भी समझते हैं, पाकिस्तानी भी, और जो भी कई दुनिया भर के अंदर जो आज़ादी की बात करते हैं, यहाँ के खुद इरादियत की बात करते हैं या डीकोलोनलाइजेशन की बात करते हैं, और कॉलोनी से निकल के ब्रिटिश जो एम्पायर था यहाँ पे, ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी से जो निजात की बात हम करते हैं, तो जो उसकी रूट कॉज है वो जो अनफिनिश्ड एजेंडा था 1947 का, जिस तरीके से मसूद खान साहब ने भी कहा और दूसरी सरीना साहिबा ने भी बताया कि आज का दिन, मतलब कल का जो 27 अक्टूबर है, ये दिन और 5 अगस्त, ये दो दिन है जो कि डार्केस्ट चैप्टर्स हैं कश्मीर की तारीख के अंदर, इसकी हिस्ट्री के अंदर, क्योंकि पहले तो इनकी ऑक्यूपेशनल फोर्सेस आई, इनकी आर्मी आई 1947 के अंदर 27 अक्टूबर को, और अब 5 अगस्त 2019 को हिंदुस्तान की आवाम को भी एज ऑक्यूपाइंग पब्लिक जो है एक फ्री लाइसेंस दे दिया गया कि वो आए, हमारी ज़मीनों पे कब्जा करें, प्लंडर करें, उनको सारे जो वोटर राइट्स हैं, रेजिडेंसी सर्टिफिकेट्स हैं, डोमिसाइल्स हैं, 45 लाख जो लेटेस्ट है, पिछले महीने 40 लाख तक आ रहा था जो स्टेटिस्टिक थी, डोमिसाइल्स जो रजिस्टर किए गए हैं इंडियंस के, जो उनको हक दिया गया है एक डिस्प्यूटेड टेरिटरी के अंदर, वहां पे वोटर राइट्स भी दिए गए हैं, प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स भी दिए गए हैं, कश्मीरियों के सारे इकोनॉमिक राइट्स को। तो इसलिए ये जो ऑक्यूपेशन को हर डेकेड अगर हम देखें ओवर 74 इयर्स, तो उसके अंदर जिस तरीके से स्ट्रेटेजिकली, कैलकुलेटिवली हिंदुस्तान ने एक द ओनली 2 वेजिटेशन दैट हैव बीन ग्रोइंग in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. One is the Indian Army boot, and the second is the graveyard. They keep expanding over there of innocent Kashmiris. So now I would like to just share a few points with the August gathering, that when we speak about occupation, when we speak about freedom, when we speak about liberation, the main concept or the soul behind it is the right to self-determination. And that is what Kashmiris have been fighting for, unarmed, defenselessly, for over 74 years against the highest occupation of the world. And when we talk about strengthening our case internationally, as the Honorable Masood Khan Sahab also mentioned, that the political, the diplomatic front, the legal front is also equally important, because of the lawfare committed by India of how to stop this genocide that's going on, especially of a disputed territory, by the violation of 4th Geneva Convention. we see that India has quite blatantly, it has violated international humanitarian law, international law, UN resolutions. It has violated all bilateral treaties between India and Pakistan, and even their own Indian constitution. They have literally, what they have done right now is, they have unilaterally, through a stroke of a pen, through a presidential order, they have made Kashmiris refugees on their own land. And also, right now, when we talk to legal experts on international law, what they say is that now, technically speaking, there is jungle law being implemented in Kashmir. There's no validation for anything that's going on over there. So how to stop that? That is our main concern right now. How to stop that genocide, how to revert back to the abrogation Article 370 situation, and how to counter India internationally, and how to get it under the international obligation radar, and how to get it sanctioned. So for that, I think it's very important. I've suggested that earlier also to the Foreign Office and through this think tank also. My suggestion is that it's high time we should have a separate division, a legal cell in the Foreign Office. And I know that they're working on it. They're taking opinions from various international law experts, and there are double opinions. It's still, in process for Pakistan to decide that if they have to explore the possibilities of taking the matter to the ICJ. And for that, obviously, they need a very, very strong legal team that looks from the spectrum of international law. And also experts on the UN mechanism. We don't just need political awareness, which is very, very crucial to keep the issue alive within Pakistan, but we need experts to go internationally to address the issue, to advocate, to do convincing for it. In the UN mechanism, the rapporteurs, the procedures, the mannerism through which lobbying, networking, getting hold of strategists, trying to convince them the importance of the Kashmir issue directly linked with the regional and global peace and securities. And what strengthens the case even more for the right to self-determination is the fact that, as the previous speaker, Ms. Serena, also mentioned, that post 5th of August, the situation on ground has worsened. I mean, what do we see there? We see higher occupation, we see gross human rights violations. And currently, when Amit Shah was there in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, they have increased the amount of occupation and they have arrested thousands and thousands of youth. And people were asking me in various webinars and questionnaires that, what do you see behind this motive? And simple answer to that is that they have either eliminated our leadership, the top tier leadership in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, by poisoning Mr. Ashraf Sarai, or the brutal treatment of the dead body of the honorable, one of the greatest leaders of Kashmir struggle, Saeed Ali Gilani Saab, how his family was beaten up when they were mourning the dead body, and against his will, he was buried in the dead of the night as if he was some absconder, God forbid, or a terrorist, and nobody was allowed. And even till date, people are not allowed to go even to his grave to pay the last respects. So how his family is being targeted, how families of other Hurriyat leadership is being targeted. They are being, even my own family right now, they are being kicked out from their jobs that they were going to, some of Yasin Malik's cousins and relatives. And that's what they're doing with Mr. Gilani's family. And the rest of the leadership, either they're killed, poisoned in jail, beaten up in jails, being tortured. Especially my husband is in a death cell. His health condition is very, very fragile. And it's just God's miracle that he's still alive and he's in the same death cell where Afzal Guru and Maqbul Bhatt Shaheed were kept before they were hanged. And we have Asya Andrabi Sahiba. She's in Tihar in a critical state. She's asthmatic and COVID has been spreading there. It's overly populated prison. Then Shabir Shah Saab is also in prison in Tihar. So India's concept right now, or the efforts that are going on in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, is to absolutely zero tolerance policy is going on over there, that any voice of dissent from the youth, from the public, even taking the example of the recent cricket match that Pakistan won. Kashmiris were naturally happy because there's a natural affinity towards Pakistan. And if India loses to any other country, Kashmiris are always happy. But when it comes to Pakistan, it's in their soul, that love, that happiness, that they cannot hide. But I got a message from one of my friends in Kashmir through Facebook Messenger, and she mentioned that Pakistan jeet bhi jaye, तो कश्मीरी को मारना है इंडिया ने, पाकिस्तान हार भी जाए तो तब भी कश्मीरी को ही मारना है. मतलब कि all the gussa, the anger, it's going to come out on Kashmiris because they are the most vulnerable. We've seen a lot of videos that are going on viral where people are trying to celebrate and, fireworks and crackers and everything, and they're being arrested. And the same is going on with the youth over there when they're protesting against India's moves or their barbaric treatment with the Kashmiris. They are being arrested. So the first tier, second tier leadership, and also the youth, they're locked up. So what is the way forward? How do we continue? Because it's not humanly possible that, if you put yourself in their shoes right now, that you don't have an army, you don't have any foreign office, you don't have an interior ministry, you have the devil's army, you have an alien occupation over there, their own legal system, your top tier leadership, imagine all the leadership in Pakistan or in Azad Kashmir, they're all locked up in jails and their families are also being attacked or killed. And there's Indian army everywhere. How would you resist? How would you continue this struggle? It's not a game of 1 year. It's over 74 years. So this is a dilapidating situation, but we need to, as Mr. Masood Khan said, we need a broad brush approach. And when we talk about Kashmir, we should not just focus that it's war crime. I mean, it's not just a war crime because war also takes place between armies. This is an unarmed army of people coming out on the roads just protesting. So this is a humanitarian tragedy. And when we look at it from that concept, the highest crime that's being committed there, to how can we take the case forward? So I have a few suggestions to the UN, which I'm sure you've always been very encouraging, the various think tanks in Pakistan, and our advices are heard, the way the dossier was taken to the UN. A lot of us have lobbied, have spoken up, or given our input for these dossiers that were presented to the UN. It's very important that not just being sent there, but legal action being taken. So one of my suggestions is that it's high time that, a resolution should be passed by the UN. For that, we all need to lobby for that, demanding a population census from India and Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because they are rapidly changing the population dynamics over there. And when we talk about the official population census that was conducted in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that took place in 2011. And I would like to share some extra information with the August gathering over here, that the official census in 2011 did not mention the religion section in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And for the past 25 years or so, India has systematically, calculatively, quite cunningly has removed that religion section. It is not just in the Hindutva rule or the RSS or the Modi rule. It happened during the Congress rule as well. Slowly, gradually, how they were changing the demography. But in 2011, the population census was that 6.8 million was the population of the valley, and 5.3 was of the Jammu division. And now, recently, we saw a roundtable conference being conducted by Mr. Modi, and there was a lot of media hype about it, that he's keeping on board the mainstream political parties in Kashmir, inviting them, taking their opinions. But inside the meeting, the policies, the plans that were discussed over there were alarming, were shocking, though Kashmiri public, on the whole, 99.9% rejects any form of farcical puppet elections taking place over there that happen after every 4 to 5 years. They happen under the might of the Indian gun, and the puppet politicians that come into power, they do so to, strengthen the Indian occupation by passing draconian laws over there, like Dada Pota Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But this time, they have completely used the pro-India leadership. I don't even call it leaders, they're puppets, obviously, the muftis or the Abdullahs, and they've told them quite categorically that now we will, because it's a parliamentary democracy in India, and so-called parliamentary democracy or elections are conducted in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So now they've decided, because tradition is all over the world that parliamentary democracies are based on the basis of population, not on the basis of geography. But now India is changing that, and now they are giving extra seats to Jammu, over 7 seats over there, and they're giving 24 vacant seats to Azad Kashmir. I mean, you have the former president of Azad Kashmir sitting over here. So they're giving 24 seats are being allotted to that. And also they are giving 18 seats to lower caste Hindus. So it's important on this day, because when we talk about occupation, this is also occupation, what they're doing right now with Kashmiris, the domiciles, the delimitation pacts that are taking place over there. So now in the next elections, you would see that that dream of, the muftis or the Abdullahs of being a majority and getting seats and, licking the boots of India, that is also gone. So this is the proof that not just of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, when he said that the two-nation theory is something which is inevitable and that is the only way forward. In the same manner, how the Hurriyat leadership for over 74 years has been saying time and again that these puppets will be thrown in the dustbin. And that's what's exactly happening. They have been doing politics over the blood of innocent Kashmir. They've been trampling over our dead bodies and getting into power and sucking the blood. And this Miss Mehbooba Mufti, she has been living in Papa 2 torture center. And when you pass that road in Srinagar, I get goosebumps. It's haunting, that feeling of thousands of youth with the worst treatment being done to them, being tortured, being electrocuted, being butchered, being raped over there. The screams still echo in our ears. And that is called like the Guantanamo Bay. So now the next step forward is, the only way forward, I think, is taking the case internationally, strengthening it. And for that, as Mr. Masood Saab said, that we need a political mobilization, political unity, which is lacking over here. The way it should be, the spirit is in every political party, but I think it's high time that once and for all the top tier leadership of Pakistani political parties and of Azad Kashmir and of Kashmiri diaspora should sit together, brainstorm, and allot duties to people around the globe. And we also need a very, very strong network of international human rights organizations and various, active Kashmiri diaspora. And what happened in the House of Commons, the strong debate that took place over there recently, where a lot of them spoke up against India's brutal occupations. So things should move now in our favor, hopefully, if we gear up, because for over 2 years, we've seen the lockdown of COVID, the global focus on it. And before that, when 5th of August took place, I could see, there was an international momentum taking place where there were protests in Kashmir's favor. But unfortunately, the tragic March lockdown happened because of COVID, and the focus reverted. And that's when India took advantage. So now when the world is settling down, we need to recharge our energies and come forward. And even within the bureaucracy also, in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the job quotas, you hardly have any Muslims, in the bureaucracy now. You have mostly Indians over there, and the educational rights of Kashmiris are being given to Indians. The tourist resorts over there, they are now being leased to Indian industrialists and being allotted to them of a disputed territory. So if, God forbid, in the next 1 or 2 years, if we have over, like 80, 90 lakh people over there, and then India conducts a plebiscite, then I'm afraid, all our sacrifices will go in vain. So we need to stop them urgently. And for that, we desperately, desperately need a UN envoy on Kashmir, and we need observer status. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mashal Malik. Now I will request our esteemed audience to kindly go ahead and ask their questions, but I may also add that we may not have time for additional questions. We will only be accommodating 2 questions, and then we will move towards our concluding remarks, and I will be requesting Ambassador Anamul Haq for that.
Raza Khan, Special Correspondent, PTV World. Mr. Masood, we know you from not only your days as a spokesman at the Foreign Office, but also ISSI, DG, and then the President of AJK. I just want to ask you, are you satisfied with your innings that you've played as the President of AJK? And what message would you like to give us about we used to see you going to Brussels, going to EU, UN. I mean, you were perhaps the most active president that we saw in our lifetimes of AJK. But the point I want to ask your opinion on is, has the world community responded at all to your eloquence? We saw you delivering speeches all over the place, but also you've used the word realpolitik once when you were DG ISSI. Or is that just because India is too big an economy, or is it the new darling of the West that we are just beating about the bush? And as Madam Mushal pointed out, that all these efforts of putting it on UN's front burner is just going to go waste. What is your honest analysis of your innings as a president and where we stand as far as our Kashmir cause is concerned?
बड़े ज़बरदस्त तरीके से आप जो है पीटीवी की नुमाइंदगी करते हैं, हर जगह मौजूद होते हैं, और आपका चैनल अंग्रेजी का है, इजाज़त दें मैं उर्दू में बात करूं। तो सबसे पहले इससे पहले कि मैं आपके सवाल का जवाब दूं, यहाँ जो मैं आपका बेहद ममनून हूँ कि आपने ये प्रोग्राम किया, और जो एक बहुत बड़ी शख्सियत बैठे हैं, जो एक्स फॉरेन मिनिस्टर जिनका मैंने शुरू में जिक्र किया, उनकी मौजूदगी में मुझे बात नहीं करनी चाहिए थी, क्योंकि माशाल्लाह उनका इतना तजुर्बा है, उतना उनका इल्म है, उतनी उनकी कमिटमेंट थी। और मैं इसलिए भी कहना चाहता हूँ कि जब 90 की दिहाई में हम कश्मीर का मुकदमा जनरल असेंबली यूनाइटेड नेशंस में पेश कर रहे थे और उसके अलावा जिनीवा में पेश कर रहे थे, तो जो हमारे पास मवाद मौजूद था और उससे बेहतर मवाद आज तक नहीं लिखा गया, वो एम्बेसडर इनाम ने लिखा था, जो बाद में फॉरेन मिनिस्टर भी हुए। और तो इसलिए मैं उनका शुक्रिया भी अदा करना चाहता हूँ, क्योंकि उस वक्त जो है उन्होंने समत हमें मुतय्यन करके दी थी, और वो हमारे लिए आज तक जो है दफ्तर ख़ारजा के लिए, पूरी पाकिस्तानी कौम के लिए जो है एक नज़रियाती असास है, एक फ़िक्री असास है। तो मैं आपका शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ। यानी जो हमने गुफ्तगू की वो गुस्ताखी के ज़ुमरे में आती है आपकी मौजूदगी में। आसिफ दुरानी साहब हैं, माशाल्लाह ये सफ़ीर रह चुके हैं कई जगहों पे, लेकिन उसके अलावा दिल्ली में रहे हैं, यानी ये दिल्ली के नब्ज़ शनास हैं, और वहाँ से इन्होंने बराह रास्त मुशाहिदा किया हुआ है। इसी सांस में जो है मैंने मिशाल मलिक की कई तकरीरें सुनी हैं, लेकिन जो आज इन्होंने तकरीर की है उसकी मैं इसलिए तारीफ़ करना चाहता हूँ कि इन्होंने जो कश्मीर के अंदर जो क़यामत बर्पा है उसकी आपको झलकियाँ दिखाई हैं, और उसके बाद फिर उन्होंने जो है हिकमत अमली का भी जिक्र किया है, और उसमें बहुत से ऐसे नुकात हैं जिनके ऊपर न सिर्फ गौर व खौस किया जा सकता है बल्कि उनको हिकमत अमली में तब्दील किया जा सकता है। तो मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई आपकी सारी की सारी तकरीर सुन के। अब मैं आपके सवाल का जवाब देता हूँ। तो उसमें ये है कि एक लम्हे के लिए भी ये ना सोचिएगा कि मैं खुद सिताई कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि मैं गया हूँ, मैं कई जगहों पे गया हूँ, اور بعض جگہوں کے بارے میں جو ہے ہم نے تشہیر کی، بعض کے بارے میں تشہیر نہیں کی جان بوجھ کے۔ تو ایک چیز جو میں آپ کو بتانا چاہتا ہوں، ہم یورپین یونین گئے، یورپین پارلیمنٹ گئے، ہم برطانیہ گئے، امریکہ گئے، کینیڈا گئے، گلف خلیجی ریاستوں میں جہاں ہمارے جو سفراء منع کرتے تھے کہ یہاں ہندوستان کی بہت لابی ہے، نہ آئیں، ذلت و رسوائی ہوگی، وہاں ہم پہنچے، وہاں بھی پذیرائی ہوئی، اور جنوب مشرقی ایشیا میں گئے۔ ایک چیز یہ میں آپ کو بتاتا ہوں کہ تجربے کا نچوڑ یہ ہے کہ آپ جائیں، دروازہ کھٹکھٹائیں، اور کسی نہ کسی دن وہ دروازہ کھلتا ہے، لوگ سنتے ہیں، اور دنیا میں جو سول سوسائٹی ہے اس وقت، وہ آپ کا بیانیہ سننے کے لیے تیار ہے۔ اسی لیے میں بار بار زور دیتا ہوں کہ جو ہمارے سیاستدان ہیں وہ باہمی اختلافات کو مٹا کر کشمیر کے بارے میں 2-3 اور قومی موضوعات ہیں، باہر جائیں۔ میں نے یہ شہادت آ کے پاکستان کی قیادت کو اور پاکستان کے حزب اختلاف کو دی ہے کہ جناب، آپ کی کہانی، آپ کی روداد دنیا سننے کے لیے تیار ہے۔ ٹھیک ہے، میں اپنی ایک حیثیت میں گیا تھا، لیکن آپ کی آواز مجھ سے بھی زیادہ مؤثر ہے، اور اگر آپ لوگ چلے جائیں، میں نے کہا کہ آپ سب لوگ جو ہے رواں انگریزی بولتے ہیں، ماشاءاللہ جو ہے یہاں جو ہے آپ کی میں بحث و تمہیز سنتا ہوں تو اس میں بڑی گہرائی اور گہرائی ہوتی ہے۔ تو یہ میں آپ کو نچوڑ بتا رہا ہوں کہ اس سے پہلے جو ہے کچھ کامیابیاں ہمیں ہو رہی تھی۔ مثال کے طور پر بہت ساری تاریخی چیزیں ہوئیں۔ 2018 میں اقوام متحدہ کی جو ہیومن رائٹس کاؤنسل ہے، اس نے ایک مبسوط رپورٹ شائع کی اور اس میں ہندوستان کو مورد الزام ٹھہرایا۔ 2019 میں دوبارہ کروائی، زید راد الحسین نے وہ رپورٹیں چھپوائی تھی۔ پھر جو ہے جو ہاؤس آف کامنز کی تاریخ میں پہلی مرتبہ جو ہے وہ 2018 کے اواخر میں ایک کل جماعتی ان کا ایک جو گروپ ہے، پارلیمنٹری گروپ ہے، جس کے 76 ارکان ہیں، انہوں نے ایک رپورٹ چھاپی ہے۔ اس کے بعد اگر آپ نے دیکھنا ہے ایک ٹریجر ٹروو، ایک خزینہ جو دیکھنا ہے آپ نے، تو میں آپ کو بتاتا ہوں کہ 2019 اگست 2019 سے لے کے اکتوبر 2019 تک دنیا کے بڑے بڑے اخبارات، ٹیلی ویژن نیٹ ورکس، تھنک ٹینکس آپ کے حق میں، اہل جموں کشمیر کے حق میں جو ہے آواز بلند کی، تمام پابندیوں کے باوجود ہندوستان کی ناراضگی کی پرواہ نہیں کی۔ بڑے بڑے جو اخبارات ہیں انہوں نے جو ہے ان کے ایڈیٹوریل بورڈز پورے کے پورے بیٹھے، انہوں نے کشمیر کے اوپر ایک بڑے مضبوط اداریے لکھے۔ جو میں یہ کہنا چاہتا ہوں کہ آپ باہر جائیے تو صحیح۔ اب میں آخر میں جو ہے اس میں ایک نقطہ بڑھانا چاہتا ہوں کہ لوگ جو ہے جو جارج فلائیڈ جو ہے جب اس کے ساتھ زیادتی ہوئی، اسے قتل کیا گیا، تو پوری امریکی قوم کھڑی ہو گئی تھی، اور پھر ہم نے دیکھا پوری بین الاقوامی برادری کھڑی ہو گئی۔ تو میں لوگوں کو یہ صلاح دیتا تھا، یہاں مجھے جو ٹیلی ویژن پہ سوال پوچھتے تھے کہ جی ہمارے لیے کیوں نہیں کھڑی ہو رہی، میں نے کہا اس لیے کہ آپ نہیں کھڑے ہو رہے، کیونکہ جارج فلائیڈ کے لیے پہلے امریکی سوسائٹی کھڑی ہوئی تھی، پھر سارے کے سارے لوگ۔ اسی لیے میری جو ہے اس وقت جو ہے حاصل بحث یہ ہے کہ جیسے جس کی طرف مشال ملک جو ہے اشارہ کر رہی تھی، وہ یہ ہے کہ ٹرن اٹ انٹو اے سول رائٹس موومنٹ، کیونکہ حکومتیں جو ہے مثلا یہ کہ ہمیں کامیابی ہو گئی وہاں اس میں پارلیمنٹ، ہاؤس آف کامنز میں، ہاؤس آف لارڈز میں، یا جو یورپین پارلیمنٹ میں، لیکن 10 ڈاؤننگ اسٹریٹ خاموش ہے۔ ایف سی او جو ہے وہ مبہم اور دور معنی کے جو ہے وہ بیانات دیتا ہے۔ جو بائیڈن جو ہے اپنی انتخابی مہم میں کشمیر کا ذکر کرتے تھے، کیملا ہیرس ذکر کرتی تھی، اب وہ خاموش ہے۔ اسی طریقے سے یہ میں کہہ رہا ہوں کہ جو ہمارا وہیں جو ہے پارلیمنٹ سے حکومتوں تک ہمارا پیغام نہیں پہنچ رہا، کیونکہ ان مصلحتیں ہیں، ہندوستان کے ساتھ اربوں کی تجارت کر رہے ہیں۔ خلیجی ریاستوں میں ہمیں ایک بہت بڑا چیلنج ہے، ملیشیا، انڈونیشیا، وہاں جو ہے آپ کو میں بتاتا ہوں کہ وہاں یہ جو آسیان ہے، اس کی 7 جو پارلیمنٹس تھے اس میں فرینڈز آف کشمیر کے گروپ بن گئے تھے۔ اس کے بعد یہ وہاں یوتھ موبلائز ہو گئی تھی، یعنی ان کو کشمیر کاز اپنا کاز نظر آ رہا تھا۔ جائیے، صحیح کیجیے، جدوجہد کیجیے، یقیناً کامیابی ہوگی، کیونکہ آپ حق پہ ہیں۔ اگر تو آپ کسی غلط چیز کے لیے لڑ رہے ہوں کہ بھئی آپ یہ انہوں نے اشارہ کیا کہ یہ ایک عجیب و غریب قسم کی جنگ ہے کہ ایک طرف لوگ نہتے ہیں اور دوسری طرف دنیا کی ایک مسلح ترین فوج کھڑی ہے، 9 لاکھ، ڈرتے وہ پاکستان سے ہیں، 2/3 فوج انہوں نے پاکستان کے خلاف متعین کی ہوئی ہے، 9 لاکھ سارے کے سارے کشمیر میں لا کے بٹھائے ہوئے ہیں کیومولیٹیولی. اور دلباغ سنگھ جو ان کا ڈائریکٹر جنرل پولیس ہے وہ کہتا ہے جی 250 ہیں. ہر 6 مہینے کے بعد کہتا ہے اس 250 میں سے 100 مار دیے ہم نے، اب 150 رہ گیا، پھر 250 کر دیتا ہے. اور نہ ان کے پاس کوئی سپلائی چین ہے. تو جیسے یہ فرما رہی تھی کہ پورا کشمیر نہتا ہے. There is no weapon supply for them. They do not have even small arms. وہ اکا دکا کسی کے پاس کوئی چیز کوئی ہو گئی. تو کہنے کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ یہ ایک عجیب و غریب دنیا کی جنگ ہے. دنیا کے غیر مسلح ترین لوگ جو ہے، جو قوم ہے، وہ کشمیری ہے اس وقت. تو لمبا جواب دے دیا لیکن آپ نے مجھے اکسایا تھا اس لیے.
I'll take one more question, but if you could please address that question to Ms. Mashal.
السلام علیکم، میرا نام انور عباس ہے، بول ٹی وی سے میں ہوں. اچھا سردار صاحب، میں آپ سے اور مس ملک صاحبہ سے یہ جاننا چاہتا ہوں کہ اپنے آپ کو اپنے سامنے ایمانداری سے رکھتے ہو، کیا آپ سمجھتے ہیں کہ آپ نے جو کچھ کشمیر کے لیے کیا وہ کافی ہے؟ آپ نے اپنا کردار ادا کیا، اور منسٹری آف فارن افیئرس کا جو کردار ہے اس کو آپ کیسے دیکھتے ہیں؟ بینگ آنیسٹ. شکریہ.
پہلے آپ.
کوئی بھی اسٹرگل ہو یا کوئی بھی کام ہو، دن میں جب ہم اٹھتے ہیں، اگر ہم اس کو ایمانداری سے، کوئی بھی چھوٹا سا کام، کھانا بھی بنانا ہو، کپڑے دھونے ہو، یا کوئی ہم نے کوئی آفس کا کوئی کمٹمنٹ کرنی ہے، یا اپنی فیملی ریلیشنز کے اندر اگر ہم آنیسٹی یا ایمانداری سے رہیں گے تو نیچرلی وہ ہمارے کام میں بھی ریفلیکٹ کرے گی. تو یہ تو ایک ایسی اسٹرگل ہے جس کے اندر اگر کوئی اس کو خدا نخواستہ کسی اور لائن میں سمجھے تو میں سمجھتی ہوں کہ انہوں نے تو ابھی سے اپنی ایک دوزخ کما لی ہے انہوں نے، کیونکہ یہ تو شہیدوں کی اسٹرگل ہے. اور یہ مجھے ہانٹ کرتی ہے کیونکہ جب میری یاسین صاحب سے بھی شادی ہوئی ہے تو میری ان سے نہیں، صرف ایک انسان ایک ہیرو سے نہیں ہوئی ہے، میری پوری تحریک کے ساتھ ہوئی ہے. اور وہاں جب میں پہلی دفعہ بھی گئی 6 سپٹمبر کو مسعود صاحب، تو پہلی جو جگہ تھی وہ بھی اتفاق سے ڈیفینس ڈے تھا. وہ بھی انڈیا کو بہت عجیب لگا کہ پاکستان سے ایک لڑکی آئی ہے اور ڈیفینس ڈے پہ وہ سری نگر پہنچ گئی ایز اے پبلک فگر. تو اس دن سب سے پہلے ہم لوگ شہدا کے مزار پہ گئے تھے، جو مجھے یاسین صاحب لے کے گئے تھے وہاں. تو تب سے لے کر اب تک جو بھی میں چھوٹا، میں اس میں کوئی کنٹریبیوٹ کر رہی ہوں، میں نے اپنی زندگی، میں سمجھتی بہت چھوٹی بات ہے کہ میں نے اپنی لائف دے دی ہے اس کاز کو، اور ٹل اینڈ میں نے دینی ہے. مگر بات یہ ہے کہ چاہے میں ناروے گئی ہوں یا ملیشیا گئی ہوں، میرے ویزا ایشوز رہے ہیں، کیونکہ مجھے بہت سے دعوت نامے آئے ہیں. مسعود خان صاحب کو یہ بات کا پتہ ہے، کیونکہ انڈیا کے لیے بہت بڑی تھریٹ ہے کہ اگر کسی حریت رہنما وہاں پہ ڈائریکٹلی پہنچ جائے مقبوضہ جموں کشمیر سے، یا ان کی کوئی فیملی ممبر ہی پہنچ جائے، تو میں فیملی ممبر نہیں بلکہ جتنا میری والدہ بھی ادھر بیٹھی ہوئی ہیں، ہم ایز اے فیملی جو ہیں مجھے سپورٹ کیا جاتا ہے. تو میں یہاں سڑکوں پہ نکلتی ہوں، پروٹیسٹ میں جہاں جہاں جا سکتی ہوں، میری یہ کوشش ہوتی ہے کہ ہم اس ایشو کو الائیو رکھیں پولیٹیکلی، ڈپلومیٹکلی، اینڈ اس کے اندر بہت ہیلپ بھی ملی ہے. اگر میں باہر، میرے ویزاز انڈیا کی اتنی اسٹرانگ لابی ہے، نہیں مل سکے مجھے پاس میں. مگر میں جب ناروے میں گئی تھی، جو مسٹر بانڈوک ہیں فارمر پرائم منسٹر، وہ نوبیل پرائزز بھی دیتے ہیں، تو وہ سب سے بڑا ڈونر ہے ناروے یونائٹڈ نیشنز کا، اور ان کا بھی بہت بڑا رول ہے جو آج میں ریویل کرنا چاہتی ہوں آپ کو، کہ جو یو این کی جو ہیومن رائٹس کی رپورٹ ہوئی ہے اس میں بہت زیادہ ناروے نے بھی اس کو بیک کیا تھا. اس دوران ہم لوگ ناروے کے اندر تھے اور ہمیں بتایا گیا تھا ہائیسٹ لیول پہ ان کی گورنمنٹ نے بھی. آف دا ریکارڈ بہت سی چیزیں جو مسعود خان صاحب بھی نہیں بتا سکتے، میں بھی نہیں بتا سکتی، جو بیہائنڈ دا سین ڈپلومسی یا جو ہم نیٹ ورکنگ کر رہے ہیں، اور اس کے اندر لوگ سننے کو تیار ہیں. یہ بیچ میں کووڈ کے 2 سال آگے جس میں پورا کا پورا دنیا کا فوکس ہٹ گیا اور ہمارا جینوسائڈ چلتا ہے. اب کیونکہ ہم اس سے نکل رہے، وی ریئلی نیڈ اے ویری اسٹرانگ پالیسی ٹو انٹرنیشنلائز اٹ. ہمارا جو اسٹانس ہے اس کو لیگلی ہم انٹرنیشنلی لے کے جائیں اور بہت وگرسلی. اور وی نیڈ کشمیر ایمبیسڈرز فرام پاکستان اینڈ آزاد کشمیر آلسو. ان کی ڈیوٹی ہو کہ انہوں نے 24 آورس جو ہے کشمیر پہ ایڈوکیٹ کرنا، اور ایک باقاعدہ ایک سیل بنایا جائے جو 24/7 جو گلوبلی ان ٹچ ہے گلوبل آڈینس کے ساتھ، سول سوسائٹی کے ساتھ، ہیومن رائٹس آرگنائزیشنز کا، جس کا سول موٹیو ہی یہی ہونا چاہیے کہ کشمیر ایشو کو ایڈریس کیا جائے. سرینا کے باہر جو ایک کلاک لگا ہوا ہے، that clock is very good, but is that enough? No, it's not enough. اس سے ہم ریمائنڈر نہیں دے سکتے, صرف ہم نے اس کو آگے لے کے جانا ہے. تو اس کے لیے بھی بہت سی اپرچونیٹیز ہم نے خود کریٹ کرنی ہے. اور یہ آزادی کی جو تحریکیں ہیں ان کو 100 سال بھی لگ جاتے ہیں, شاید ہم ادھر ہوں ہی نہ, بٹ یہ آزادی ملنی ہی ملنی ہے انشاءاللہ تعالیٰ. یہ ہمارے ایمان کا حصہ ہے. بٹ فار دیٹ یہ نہیں ہے کہ ہم نے اپنے ایمان کی مان لی اور ہم نے کام نہیں کیا. تو کام ہم نے کرنا ہے اس کے لیے.
آپ نے 2 سوال پوچھے ہیں, ایک میرے بارے میں اور ایک دفتر خارجہ کے بارے میں. میرے بارے میں یہ بتاؤں گا کہ ہم نے کوشش 100% کی ہے. نتائج جو ہے وہ میں ان کے بارے میں یہ کہوں گا کہ تحریک آزادی میں کوئی ٹائم لائن نہیں ہوتی کہ ہم نے پہلے سے طے کیا ہو کہ جی فلاں تاریخ کو جو ہے کشمیر آزاد ہو جائے گا, تو ہم اس ڈیڈ لائن کے اگینسٹ جو ہے کام کر رہے ہیں. اگر ہم واقعی تحریک آزادی میں اس کے اوپر یقین رکھتے ہیں تو وہ تحریک آزادی it should have been successful yesterday. It should have been successful in 1948. تو ہماری جد و جہد جاری ہے, ہم جد و جہد میں ہیں. کسی قسم کی کوئی شیخی بگاڑنے کی ضرورت نہیں ہے. ہم سب لوگ جو ہے اس میں کوشش کر رہے ہیں, کیونکہ ہندوستان جو ہے اٹس اے فارمیڈیبل کنٹری, اور اس نے یہ کہہ دیا کہ یہ علاقہ میرا ہے, اور اس کے بعد جو ہے تفصیلات دی ہیں کہ کس طریقے سے وہ کنسالیڈیٹ کر رہا ہے وہاں اپنا قبضہ. تو یہ ہے, اور اس سلسلے میں ہم نے کوشش کی ہے. ابھی یہ ذکر کر رہی تھی, ہم نے مثال کے طور پر میں آپ کو یہ بتا دیتا ہوں کہ یہ جو 2019 سے پہلے جو یہ بانڈیوک تھے, جو ان کے سابق وزیر اعظم تھے, ڈکلرک تھے ساؤتھ افریقہ کے, گورڈن براؤن تھے, 2-4 اور بڑے بڑے عمائدین کے جن کے میں نام نہیں لینا چاہتا, ان کا ہم نے گروہ بنا لیا تھا میڈیٹرز کے لیے. اس کے اس وقت بھی جو ہے کچھ کوششیں جاری ہیں کہ کس طریقے سے ہم تھرڈ پارٹی میڈیشن کروا سکیں, سول سوسائٹی سے کروا سکیں, یا کسی طریقے سے جو کوئی مدبرین ہیں, اسٹیٹسمن ہیں, ان سے کروا سکیں. تو دیکھیے اس میں جو ہے جو بڑی بات جو میں نے آپ کو پیغام دیا ہے کہ پوری کی پوری پاکستان کو کرنا ہوگا. یہ صرف حکومت کا فرض نہیں, یہ اپوزیشن, یہ ساری کی ساری سول سوسائٹی مل کی. جو دفتر خارجہ کے بارے میں جو میں بات کہنے والا ہوں وہ اس وجہ سے نہیں کہ میرا دفتر خارجہ سے تعلق رہا ہے. میں آپ کو یہ کہنا چاہتا ہوں کہ میں فارن آفس کو سلوٹ کرتا ہوں کہ 74 سال سے وہ اس مقدمے کی وکالت کر رہی ہیں. اور ایک مرتبہ مجھے یاد ہے کہ خورشید محمود قصوری اور نٹور سنگھ کے درمیان ایک انفارمل مکالمہ ہو رہا تھا, میں موجود تھا وہاں. نٹور سنگھ نے یہ کہا کہ ہم اتنا بڑا ملک, اور اس کے بعد ہم نے ہماری اتنی طاقت, اتنے ہمارے دوست, وسائل, پاکستان ہمارے مقابلے میں چھوٹا ملک, اور ہم نے ہر قسم کی کوشش کی ہے کہ جو مسئلہ کشمیر جو ہے اقوام متحدہ بین الاقوامی ایجنڈے سے ختم ہو جائے. نہیں ہوا. وہ کہتا ہے کہ اٹس بیکاز آف یور فارن آفس. اور یہ میں آپ کو بتا رہا ہوں کہ جو فارن آفس کے لوگ ہیں وہ کہیں نہ کہیں محاذ پہ کھڑا ہے. اس وقت جو ہے جو پچھلے 24 گھنٹے گزرے ہیں یا پچھلا مہینہ گزرا ہے, تو وہ کہیں کھڑا ہے. اس میں سے کوئی لڑکا جو ہے جو نیامے میں ہے, یا نیو یارک میں ہے, یا سول میں ہے, دنیا کے کسی حصے میں آپ کا کوئی لڑکا لڑکی وہاں کھڑے ہیں اور اس مقدمے کی وکالت کر رہے ہیں. تو لیکن جو میں نے آخری نقطہ آپ کو بتایا تھا وہ یہ تھا کہ ان کی ذمہ داری سفارتی ہے, سیاسی نہیں ہے. یعنی یہ ایک باریک نقطہ سمجھنے کی کوشش کیجیے کہ وہ سیاسی رہنما نہیں ہے. تو وہ اپنے جو ہے اپنا جو کام ہے, جو ان کا اپنا پروفیشن ہے, اس کو بہترین طریقے سے کریں گے. اور دوسرے یہ ہے کہ جو عام طور پہ جو پارلیمنٹیرینس ہوں, جو سول سوسائٹی کے رہنما ہوں, ان کی ایکسپیکٹیشن یہ ہوتی ہے کہ فارن آفس اومنیپوٹنٹ, کہ اس کے پاس کوئی ایسی چابیاں ہیں کہ وہ یوں گھمائیں گے اور مسئلہ کشمیر حل ہو جاتا ہے. دفتر خارجہ جو ہے, یہ ہمارے سابق وزیر خارجہ آپ کو بتائیں گے کہ وہ حکومت وقت اور ریاست, جو مجموعی ریاست کی قیادت بنتی ہے, وہ پارلیمنٹ سے بنے, وہ انتظامیہ سے بنے, مختلف اداروں سے بنے, उनके ज़ेरे हिदायत जो है वो काम करती है। तो अगर आज आप नशर कर रहे हैं तो और अपने नशरिए में जो है दफ्तर खारजा की तारीफ कीजिएगा जो उन्होंने कश्मीर के सिलसिले में मिसाली किरदार अदा किया।
Thank you, esteemed panel. I will now request Ambassador Inamul Haq, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, to kindly come and deliver his concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to begin by thanking Sardar Masood Khan, former president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, not only to chair this session, but also to provide us the history of the continuing struggle of the Kashmiri people for their fundamental rights for more than 150 years. And I think it's natural. They say, gahe gahe baaz khan, in kissa pari nara. This is a current problem, not an old problem. And it is right that we must constantly hark back to the struggle of the Kashmiri people, which continues and will continue till, inshallah, the independence of Jammu and Kashmir from Indian clutches. For her very emotional and very solid remarks, giving also a line of action that we can pursue in the future in the pursuit of an objective which is shared by every Kashmiri and every Pakistani. But in doing so, we must bear certain historical facts in mind. And they bear repetition. The first thing is that Pakistan must never be seen to be downplaying, deviating in any way from, or putting aside the resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir adopted by the UN Security Council. This is the linchpin of our case. Pakistan's locus standi in Jammu and Kashmir is rooted in these resolutions. And we must never lose sight of this fundamental fact. Secondly, mention has been made of the so-called instrument of accession. I would like to remind you that no United Nations Security Council or UNCIP resolution makes any mention of the instrument of accession. So as far as the United Nations is concerned, that instrument does not exist and has no legal validity. We also know that it was signed perhaps much later, according to some historians, and that these signatures were extracted by force from the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. The third thing that we must remember is that the right to self-determination of people everywhere, and particularly the people of Jammu and Kashmir, is enshrined in the UN Charter itself and also in UN Security Council resolutions. It is not for India or Pakistan or anybody else in the world to give up that right on their behalf. This is an inalienable right, which has to be exercised by the Kashmiri people. Fourth, and there is confusion in some circles, even in Pakistan, about this. Armed struggle for national liberation is sanctified by the UN Charter. Let's be very clear about it. The ANC of South Africa, which is now the ruling party in South Africa, SWAPO of Namibia, ZANU and ZAPU of Zimbabwe, were all recognized by the United Nations as national liberation movements. And such struggles can never be equated to terrorism. I have seen some people, perhaps in ignorance, even in Pakistan, referring to so-called terrorism in Kashmir. All the terrorism that is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, occupied by India, is being carried out by Indian forces. The Kashmiris are resisting occupation of their land by occupying forces of India. And that is a national liberation struggle. Please don't ever even think of equating the struggle of the Kashmiri people with anything akin to terrorism. Number 5, the major violations of the human rights of the Kashmiri people, which have continued since the purchase of Jammu and Kashmir by the Maharaja from the British for 75 lakh rupees, must continue to be highlighted at all international fora. But side by side with that, we must highlight the basic issue of the non-implementation of the UNSC resolutions by the Indians, the continued illegal occupation, the illegal constitutional changes of 5th of August 2019, the illegal structural changes in the governance of the state, the demographic changes being forced in the state must be constantly underlined. Finally, there has been talk of mediation. You must always remember the difference between mediation and arbitration. Pakistan must never accept any arbitration by any third country on the issue of Kashmir, because that means that you are giving the right to a third party to decide what the future of the people of Jammu and Kashmir will be. This right rests only with the Kashmiri people and with nobody else. Mediation means that a country or a group of countries can come together to help India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiris sit together and decide on the future of Kashmir, according to the wishes of the Kashmiri people. I would also like to touch on 2 topical issues, because much is happening in Kashmir and has been described by Ambassador Masood Khan and also Ms. Mishal Mullik. One is, I hear that India and the UAE have agreed on the operation of direct flights between Dubai and Srinagar. If this is true, this is an issue of direct concern to Pakistan. It is being said that the flights might also be overflying Pakistani territory. If we allow the operation of such flights over Pakistan territory, we will by implication be accepting the legitimacy of the Indian illegal occupation of Jammu and Kashmir. And the International Civil Aviation Organization in its charter, in Article 1, very clearly recognizes the sovereignty of states over their airspace. So in denying any overflights, we will not be violating any international law. We must be very clear that such flights must not be allowed. Secondly, even if such flights were not to overfly Pakistan, we must make a very strong démarche with the UAE that it should not play into the hands of India by operating direct flights to Indian-occupied Kashmir under the garb of promoting tourism, because that would imply the acceptance by the UAE of the illegal Indian position on Jammu and Kashmir. The matter should also be brought to the attention of the international community and to the attention of the United Nations Security Council. And also a strong protest must be lodged with India, as India does with Pakistan, in case of any development activity in Azad Jammu and Kashmir or in Gilgit-Baltistan undertaken in cooperation with any third country. The second issue relates to the empowerment of the people of Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. I understand that about 2 months back, the law minister sent to the Prime Minister a set of proposals to amend the Constitution of Pakistan to give the provisional status of a province to Gilgit-Baltistan, pursuant to the 2 resolutions adopted by the Legislative Assembly of GB seeking such a status. This provisional status would be given to GB pending the implementation of the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This document is apparently based on the earlier Sardar Committee report. In my view, this document suffers from legal as well as linguistic issues. First, the UN Security Council has recognized Gilgit-Baltistan as a part of Jammu and Kashmir. But this proposal gives a provisional status of a province to Gilgit-Baltistan, but keeps Azad Jammu and Kashmir separate. Thereby, it can be seen by the international community that these 2 parts of Kashmir are being treated differently. And this is being done because Azad Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly has not adopted any resolution requesting the status of a province. This would create a legal anomaly also, which needs to be resolved before this matter can be pursued any further. I will not go into the details, but I will just say that the entire spectrum of the leadership of Gilgit-Baltistan as well as Azad Jammu and Kashmir should be consulted and brought on board before moving with any legislation in the National Assembly of Pakistan. And that the leadership of different political parties of Pakistan must also be consulted and be on board before any steps are taken. And the language of the resolution should be drafted with extreme care in consultation with those like Sardar Masood Khan, who have closely examined and defended the resolutions of the UN Security Council to ensure that the ill wishers of the Kashmiri people and of Pakistan, and even the United Nations itself, does not conclude that Pakistan has moved away from UN Security Council resolutions and the right of the Kashmiri people to determine their own future. Finally, one word, and this is not a political statement. The political leadership that we select to represent the case of Kashmir abroad must be selected with extreme care. We have two very well-meaning people, very sincere people, one head of the Kashmir ministry and the other head of the Kashmir committee. And this is a personal view which may be totally wrong, but I do not think that they have the knowledge or the intellectual capacity to represent the case of Kashmir effectively at the United Nations and in world capitals. And we have seen the performance of one of those gentlemen in New York and in Paris recently. And the last word, we must never, ever give up on the case of Kashmir. The Kashmiris are giving their lives for it. The Pakistanis can at least devote their time, their effort, their ability, their skills to defend the Kashmiris and to pursue their case at all forums in the world. Thank you very much.
I will request Ambassador Sardar Masood and Acting President IPRI, and I will also request Ambassador Inamul Haq to kindly join us for a group photograph. I'll request the audience to kindly remain seated, and also our friends from the media to also remain seated. Abbas, if I could have you for the photograph, please. Ladies and gentlemen, you may kindly join us for the refreshments now. They're being served to my left.